tonight. And how I remember Hosea is like ladies wear hose, Hosea and Gomer. I remember that. I will not, because there's some other things like I get Zechariah and Zephaniah mixed up as to the contents that are in there. And both of them have, I think, a little bit of prophecy in there. One has a whole lot more than the other. But one's a much bigger book, but I usually get them mixed up. But Hosea, chapter 11, we'll kind of hit the end of it and then go back to the beginning of it. But this evening we're going to be talking about chosen by God. What does that mean to us? How many different notions of God are out there? Yeah, gobs, right? There's, if we want to look at some broad terms, there's pantheism, there's polytheism. Pantheism means he is all things, he is everywhere. Just kind of like theism is the word theos, which is the word for God. And pan means all. And so pantheism means God is all. It's not about his omniscience necessarily, omnipresence necessarily, but it's about his being everywhere. There's polytheism, which means there's a whole bunch of them, or any numbers of them. There's deism, which a lot of the founding fathers, I think, of this country were deists. He's out there. He's not really involved. He's just out there. There's agnostic, which means that he's out there. God is out there, but he really can't be known. Gnosko is the word for knowledge. Alpha is the negating of that in the Greek. So agnostic means you can't know. Regarding gods, they can't know God. Atheists, which are not agnostics, atheists don't believe there's a God at all out there. There's absolute monotheism, which means... Go ahead, Steve. Well, one God, but absolute monotheism would add a clarifier to that. Exactly. He's one God, and he's not divided into three parts, or however they want to say we do it. So, very good. And then there's, of course, Shintoism. What's Shintoism? Comes from Japan. Yeah, shins are God. No, the shin of the emperor is God, and the strength is in the empire. So that was one of the big things when Japan, when the United States actually conquered them, was a real blow to their religious notion. Buddhism. We know Buddhism. There's a lot of, there's a couple different flavors of it, but generally speaking, Buddhism is a meditative type religion that I'm familiar with. There's Hinduism, which is a form of polytheism. There's typically an Indian type one. There's Islam. Islam is absolute monotheistic. They do not believe that there's three in one. How many remember the Moonies? What's another name for the Moonies? Chingy, 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 airport. Hare Krishna. Yeah, I don't remember. It may have been, but anyway. Hare Krishnas is another name for them. There's a Jehovah's Witness, there's a Catholic, there's a Mormons. How many of them are right? Of all of the ones that I stated there, how many of them are right? Well, monotheism, I didn't say monotheism. Monotheism is out there, and that's the triune God one. There's only one God, and he's triune. And Jesus Christ, I think we have to include him in that picture, is all God and all man. So, how do you know that? How do you know that is the way, the truth, and life? Well, how do you know the Bible's true? Everyone has their Bible. I mean, the Buddhists have their Bible, the Mormons have their Bibles, the Muslims have their Bible. How do we know ours is true? Because God picked us to know that. It's the only reason. Where would we be without actually God intervening in our life, involving in our life, and to show us this is true? We can't prove it any more than anybody else can prove it. We can't. I mean, you can say, well, Jesus was here. Prove that. You really can't even prove Jesus was here. We don't even have a picture of him, And it's all a faith proposition. but it's so much that we have ordered or have supposed to have ordered our lives by. He picked us to be his child. How special is that for him to pick us to be his child? The one true God picked us to be his child.
That is just about put you in awe of what, why would he choose me?
Exactly. And now let's look at eternally. How special is that? If he did not pick you to know this and to respond to this, eternally, it's hell. And scriptures, by which we believe, tells us most people won't, don't, can't. Was this knowledge originally revealed to? Who was this knowledge originally revealed to? We would say the Jews, generally speaking, but it happened before that because, Enoch wasn't a Jew, and Noah wasn't a Jew. And, we can go on a whole bunch of people that weren't Jews. Generally speaking, we would say the Jewish people, and even regarding the Jewish people, even before they were Jewish people, God revealed himself to whom? Abraham, absolutely. And we see after or during the time of Abraham, he also revealed himself to Job. I believe it was during that time, perhaps a little after, I believe. I believe Job was written between Genesis and Exodus. There's a span of time there, and I think that's where you could put the book of Job and when it happened in that. But anyway, Job, and then we know that Enoch was there, and then Noah was there, and Methuselah was before the flood. God revealed himself to them. But are we a Jew? Are you a Jew? Then why did God reveal it to you? Why would we dare? How do we have permission to include ourselves in this group? What's that?
When we're saved, when we accept.
I mean, Jews are saved, true, by grace through faith. It's always been by grace through faith. Why do we? And it was always to a Jewish people in the Old Testament, right? Largely speaking, what Miss Al said was right. Fast track to Jewish nation, and now we're talking Jewish peoples. Is the only. It's back to that grafted thing. It's because God included us. It's not that we wanted to. It's because God included us. It wouldn't be offered to us except God included us in that, in his plan. How special is that? That we were included. Eternally, how special is that? Yeah, now we're talking real special. What if he hadn't? Here's the question. How should we thus live? That's the question. How should we thus live? I think we get familiar with being a Christian. It doesn't move us as much. It's kind of like Isaac after Abraham, hanging around with Esau. It's kind of like, yeah, I know. Instead of like Rebecca, wow, God really speaks. You see the difference in response? So let's go to Hosea chapter 11, and I want to point out something here. It started there, and I backtracked through Hosea to pick up some more things with regard to that, and picking up a couple verses in chapter 12. But it says, Ephraim compassed about me with lies, the house of Israel with deceit, but Judah yet rules with God. How many groups of people do we see here stated?
Where are you at?
Now, what verse?
Verse 12.
Hosea chapter 11, verse 12. Yeah.
Where are you?
I know I have a King James. It's not that different.
That's what I was saying, but if I didn't match up, though.
It's a pretty easy question, really.
6.
That would be the wrong answer. If you look at there, how many groups of people are being described there? Are you getting saints as the fourth one?
Yes.
Okay, that's not saints there, okay? It may not have been as easy. We have Ephraim there, we have Israel there, and we have Judah described there. And God is faithful with the saints, and there might be a reason why he says saints. Saints is kind of like one of those New Testament sounding words. And we may see a suggestion to that in these verses here. Now, if I were just to say Israel, what would you think of?
Okay, Northern tribes.
Okay, if I were to say just Israel, what would you think of? Now, you're smart, Miss Sandy. We're in Hosea, and you're thinking Israel 10. Yes, but if I were to say Israel by itself in a statement, who would we think of? The 12 tribes of Israel. Yeah, if we were just to talk about Israel on its own, we'd be talking about the 12 tribes. They had 12 sons, and they all grew to be a whole bunch of people of each of those, and they became the 12 tribes of Israel, certainly as they marched out of Egypt. Now, if I were to say Israel and Jacob, what would that suggest? This is where we go what Miss Sandy said. Israel 10. And by the way, that's a good thing to kind of retain in our readings through the Old Testament, because you'll get really confused if you get further into the Kings and the Chronicles, and they'll be talking about Israel, and oh yeah, Israel, and then it says Judah. Well, what do you mean Judah? And Judah and Israel seem like separate groups. They are at that particular point. They are separate groups. And they became separate groups after who? Solomon, by the way. Yes, indeed. They came separate groups after Solomon. And so if I were to say Israel and Judah together in the same sentence, we would think Israel 10 and quite possibly Judah southern. By the way, there's two tribes, Judah and, remember who this other one was? Benjamin, exactly. So, let me ask you this. As we're describing in this Old Testament book, this thing about Israel, it says Ephraim and Judah and Israel. Who's Ephraim? Is he an Ammonite? Is he a Moabite? Is he a Hittite? Is he a Canaanite? Who's Ephraim? Who is Ephraim? Is he Babylonian? Ephraim is Joseph's son.
That's what I was thinking. It was one of Joseph's, but I wasn't sure.
It's one of Joseph's son, and Joseph's other son was Manasseh. Interesting, when you read in scriptures, and this is everywhere I found it to be true, when Joseph is mentioned, it's usually a reference to Manasseh. And Ephraim is mentioned separate. So Ephraim is a Jew. So why is he mentioned as Ephraim, the house of Israel, and Judah? What is Ephraim then? Why is he mentioned separate? What do we know about Joseph's children? They were half-breeds. They were half Egyptian and half Jewish, because Joseph married the daughter of the priest of Egypt somewhere in there while he was there. That's where he got his two sons from. So Ephraim is a mix. Ephraim here is being used aside from Israel and Judah. This is where I get Ephraim is a symbolic reference to the church. Symbolic and a reference to the church, because the church is made up of Jews and Gentiles. Same with Zion, the city Zion. You'll see Jerusalem and Zion used in the same verse in the Psalms. I think Zion is a suggestion a symbolic suggestion as to where the elect of God gather, i.e. New Testament church, by the way. We see those symbolics throughout the scriptures, of course, a lot in Revelation, but here I think Ephraim is a symbolic suggestion to the church here, because it mentions Israel, which is the elect of God, and then it mentions Ephraim. I mean, it could have mentioned Reuben, could have mentioned Dan, could have mentioned Gad, Asher, Naphtali, etc. It didn't mention Ephraim on purpose. And I think it's because it has the non-Jew part in it. And that's what I think. I don't think you can say that all the time, by the way. Ephraimites were a bunch of mercenaries in through the judges, and they were mean about it. And that's not a symbolic reference to the church. I don't think so. But here, when we get into the prophetic books, I think Ephraim is a symbolic suggestion to that. Now, let's go back to Hosea chapter 1, verse 1. And here's something else that might be symbolic. Remember when Israel went into the promised land? Half of Manasseh stayed on one side. The other half of Manasseh went in. And here's something else to think about. Who stayed on the side, the east side of the Jordan?
Benjamin was one of them.
No, it wasn't Benjamin. It was Reuben and Reuben and Gad. And so what's the symbolic suggestion as to why Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh stay on that side of the Jordan? Just a thought to maybe dwell on. I think the Lord's given me some understanding in part on that, but it'll be more later. But anyway, Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. When Israel was a child, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. Okay. Out of all the religious notions of God back in that day, what were they? What were the religious notions of God back in the days of, say, Israel slaves in Egypt? What's that? Baal, I would say Baal was. Yep. Mm-hmm. Gods of Egypt were several, right? They believed in polytheism. There was Chemosh. There was Molech. There was Dagon. Remember Dagon? You know, that was shortly thereafter. Maybe it wasn't exactly that early on, but it might have been. There's some other notions about God. How did Israel know Jehovah? That was what he was known by back then. In fact, it's the very first name God uses of himself is what? No. That's okay. I understand where you're getting that from. Elohim. That was the first. The beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That word there is Elohim. And the word Elohim is a plural name for God, by the way. And that's where we start to get this sniff of a plurality of God. So, how did Israel know about Jehovah? I mean, all these other notions. Even Abraham didn't wake up being able to talk and he knew God from the start, right? How did he know about Jehovah? If he hadn't known about Jehovah, where would he end up? So how did Israel know about Jehovah? It's because God revealed himself to them. How then should they then live? Knowing the eternal was Israel aware of an eternal hell? A question, a fair question. Was Israel aware of the consequences of sin? Is death. Israel in Egypt. Did Israel observe the sacrificial system in Egypt?
I think so.
You think so? Okay.
Did they give burnt sacrifices in Israel?
That didn't happen until they were in the wilderness. That was when that instruction came by. Yeah. Did they know? Now we know Abraham knew some sort of a sacrifice. We know that Abel had an intuition about what to bring for a sacrifice that was shed blood, by the way. But we don't see a lot of it stated in practice. I mean, aside from Abraham, of course, Abraham was the first one, but did Noah offer a sacrifice off the boat? I don't remember. Did he?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so we don't even see Noah.
Weren't they in Egypt though when they did the blood on the door?
Yes, it was, but that was in Egypt after Abraham. That's not the entire book of Genesis is that. Is before that. So this is good because it helps us put this in a calendar effect because we could just get all squirreled up and mixed up. Well, of course they always did. Well, it's kind of like, was Jesus omniscient? Well, of course Jesus was omniscient. Was he omniscient, knowing all when he was a baby? Oh, well, I don't know now. Was he able to speak all languages when he was a baby right out of the womb? So we start asking the other questions. So, the sacrificial system. Did they realize that the consequences because that's what the sacrificial system said in it of itself, was blood is required because of your transgression. A lot of blood.
Yes, he did.
He did. Okay, so Noah did. I didn't quite remember that.
I didn't either. That's why I had to go back.
But see, Noah did. But again, how often do we see that? Now, when Abraham, we see that, and he actually had that dream too after he did the thing and parted between the two and tried to keep the birds off, and he fell asleep. And that was when the unconditional promise of salvation was stated there. But certainly not like we see Moses getting it from Mount Sinai. Israelites, this is what we're now going to do. Certainly not when Solomon took over and he sacrificed, what was it, 120,000 sheep. Did Israel, before that, back in the Exodus, did Israel know about the consequences of sin equals eternal death? It's a good question. Not like we do. We know it is, right? But all that to say, Israel was given opportunity like no other nation to know the one true God by whom there's no other no salvation. How should they then live? How should they then live? And then all the miracles at the Exodus of Egypt. How should they then live? Verse 2. As they called them, so they went from them, sacrificed unto Balaam and burnt incense to carved images. How long should the speciality, if I can use that word, of being chosen to one know God and to be in relationship with God and to have eternity with God, how long should that impression last? Last a long time, right? How long did it last after the children of Israel exited Egypt? Moses is going up. God says, get down. Those people are playing the harlot. Wait a second, Moses. Moses said, God, they ain't doing that. Get down, Moses. They get down there and they're having a party, naked, around a calf. A golden calf. Doesn't regularly last long. Doesn't regularly last long. Verse 3, I taught Ephraim also to go, taking them by their arms, but they knew not that I healed them. Interesting. If this is about Ephraim, symbolic suggestion to future church age, let's read the next word. I drew them with the cords of a man and with the bands of love. I was to them as they that take off the yoke on their jaws, and I laid food before them. You see how rich in symbology this now suggests? If this indeed is Ephraim, symbolic of the church age, drew them with the cords of a man would suggest whom? I would say Jesus Christ. And with bands of love. How about for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, have everlasting life. I was to them that they to take off the yoke on their jaws. There's this, and I don't go as far as everyone goes on this, but we understand that our salvation is not by the law any longer, it's by grace. And I laid food before them. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Boy, I cannot help but think this is a suggestion to that, even as Ephraim is a suggestion to the church. Verse 5, he shall not return into the land of Egypt, but the Assyrian shall be his king, because they refused to return. And the sword shall abide on his cities, and shall consume his branches, and devour them because of their own counsels. And my people are bent to backsliding from me. Though they call them to the Most High, none at all would exalt him. How shall I give thee up, Ephraim? How shall I deliver thee, Israel? How shall I make thee as Admon? How shall I set thee as Zeboim? My heart is turned within me. My compassions are kindled together. What is Admah and Zeboim? You remember those cities in the Old Testament? Ooh, give that man a double star. Remember, there was 5 cities that were going to be destroyed by God. One was spared because Lot was a little afraid, is what he was. Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar. Interesting. What happened to those nations? You know, it's interesting how we move further and further, become more comfortable with homosexuality in this country. I'm not sure where it is anywhere else. But in this country, how we've just completely ignored the Sodom and Gomorrah event. Wow. Yeah, this is kind of not a good wish on these peoples. I will make thee as Admah, I will set thee as Zeboim. Wow. 7 is what really caught my attention and caused me to dwell. My people are bent to backsliding from me. Though they call them to the Most High, none at all would exalt him. We have worked at realizing how special it is to know God. There's lots of different ideas out there. Most of us have been raised in a Christian home where we haven't really known any other except, oh yeah, they're Muslims. Yeah, I don't know anything they believe, but they ain't me. You go to the African countries who maybe who don't know anything about Christianity, except by that weird missionary guy who comes over and he's all sorts of weird and acting weird because he's not acting like we. It's entirely the opposite here. We're so flooded with familiarities about Christianity, we don't realize that even to know the one true God, then to know that he is the only God, and then to know that he is the only way of salvation, and then to have chosen that isn't because of us, it's because of him. We've developed this special place we are. And then how should we then live? Exalting him. Our lives should be an expression towards exalting him. It says here, none at all would. They are bent to backsliding away from me. Let's move forward now to verse 12. If you want to read the verses between 8, 9, 10, and 11, which we can there, those are stating that God will not utterly destroy them. There will be a remnant that's saved, which, praise the Lord, that is absolutely true. Let's read it. I will not execute the fierceness of mine anger. I will not return to destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not man, the Holy One in the midst of thee, and I will not enter into the city. And as he's saying there, is I'm not going to utterly destroy Ephraim. Praise God for that. We have a gathering of people called Christians today, and I wonder how small the remnant really is. The Bible tells us the remnant is small, but man, how small is small? We see the places in Ezekiel where he tells the guy with the inkhorn to go out and, mark the people that are left. And he tells them to gather the third of the hair up and chop it with a sword, and gather the third of the hair up and burn it, and gather the third of the hair up and throw it to the wind. And then he tells him to gather up what's left, and that's the remnant. I thought 1/3 plus 1/3 plus 1/3 equaled one whole. And then the man with the inkhorn goes out, starts marking people, and Ezekiel's saying, oh my goodness, is no one saved? That's real. God never changes that small sliver of saved ones. Not even today. You know how special it is that we can even know and then be saved? And God says, I will not utterly blot them out. They will walk after the Lord. He shall roar like a lion when he roars, and then the children shall tremble from the west. They shall tremble like a bird out of Egypt, like a dove out of the land of Assyria. I will place them in their houses, saith the Lord. And it seems to me here this is a suggestion perhaps to the remnant that goes back to Israel just before the Lord shows up and says, I'm here. Ephraim compasses me with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit. What's the difference between lies and deception? Deception is actually a lie of sorts. Anything short of the truth would be a lie. Anything mixed with error is a lie. Anything spoken with the intent to mislead would be a lie. How is lies here different than deception? It's kind of like Corinthians when it talks about some had a word of wisdom and some had a word of knowledge as far as the spiritual gift is concerned. What's the difference between the two? I thought the one was just like the other. You know, wisdom and knowledge. I mean, potato. But when they're used side by side, there's a suggestion of difference. What's the difference between a lie and deception?
Deception is more long term.
Okay, more long term.
I think it also includes more actions.
Deception? Ooh, nice.
So more of a choice.
Well, we've talked about deception. Let's talk about lies. It's all a choice, by the way. I want to say that lies are more verbal. Deception is more active. A lie is a person who tells you something to your face, but it's really not. Deception is doing something in a way that's not really what's beneath the surface.
I think deception would be sneaky and behind the scenes and
Yeah,
more, like you said.
sure.
Yeah.
But you understand how there's kind of like the leaning towards the one to include someone's the leaning towards the other. It's a liar, but it's a hypocritical liar. It's a deceiver. It's a hypocritical by actions, maybe deceiver. That seems to be what I get from that. Both are not good, by the way. Verse 6. Therefore, turn thou to thy God, keep mercy and justice, and wait on thy God continually. If you read further on in 12, most of Ephraim doesn't do this. I wonder if only the remnant really does. I wonder if it's really only the remnant that really get it. The remnant that really is careful. The remnant that realizes and remembers how special it is to be a chosen one of, not God's, or it's just a different name for God, or they have a different Bible. It's just in a different language. No. Not deceived. How should we then live? Really? That that should be our waking, at least part of our thoughts in the morning when we get up. How should we then live? How do we exalt God? Is that just something we would do with our lips? Well, we do that with our lips, but if our life doesn't follow, what good is that? Remember in James chapter 2, I think it is, 2 or 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. I'll show you you show me your faith without your works, I'll show you my faith by my works. But be ye doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving your own self. That's that lip service stuff. It says Ephraim is prone to the lip service stuff. Could that be a suggestion that the church is too? Isn't that really kind of what God is rebuking the church at Laodicea for? Being lukewarm? Or the church that said they had a name, that they were alive, but they were really dead? Lip service. Do we pay lip service to our Christianity? And we would say, surely not. But really, this ought to be a perpetual moving each day of our lives. I'm a Christian. What do others see? What do I see? What do I do? How do I do it? Is God being glorified? Because he's watching. And he loves, by the way. But he wants us to love him. He wants us to appreciate. And I think our lives would be consistently, growingly different when that is full on, real to us. So I hope tonight this encourages us to take that and how should I then live?